Welcome, everyone. This lecture is going to look at basic fundamentals of exercise. Let's jump in. So we're going to briefly cover relevant exercise terminology. We'll look at the amount of physical activity that's needed for optimal health across the lifespan. We'll look at fundamental principles that underlie exercise and physical activity and how you can apply them to your own exercise programming. And lastly, we'll describe the benefits of physical activity on your own personal well-being. Now, we're going to look at all of this before we dive into looking at cardiorespiratory exercise and resistance training exercise in more detail. So this is a bit of an overview of exercise, how much you need, the basic principles that underlie it, and how your body responds and benefits from physical activity. So first, exercise terminology. Basic definitions. First, physical fitness. What is physical fitness? Lots of times folks say, I want to be fit. I want to look fit. What does that actually mean? The definition of physical fitness is the ability to perform moderate to vigorous levels of activity without undue or excessive fatigue. So we'll look at what moderate and vigorous levels of physical activity actually are and how we define those things. But to better understand this, can you get through your activities of daily living? What walking or biking where you need to go, climbing up a flight of stairs, getting through the grocery store, doing household chores, any kind of physical movement that you need to do without excessive fatigue? Is your physical capacity up to the task of daily life? That's what physical fitness means. Now, you can certainly go beyond in certain categories in certain areas and look at improving sports performance or even body composition, but those are different things than basic physical fitness. Now we have physical activity, and this is a broader category than many people typically think of as well. This is any voluntary bodily movement that's produced by your skeletal muscles. So voluntary is key here. Something like a sneeze or a reflex wouldn't necessarily be considered physical activity, but even something such as brushing your teeth would count. So physical activity is all bodily movement. So you can see some of the examples here, and then you can further kind of branch that off into two distinct categories: exercise and NEAT. Exercise is what we typically think of when we're thinking about physical activity. And this is planned or structured activity with the intent of improving or maintaining fitness level. So this might look like going for a jog, going for a bike ride, weightlifting, dancing, taking a Zumba class, skateboarding, something like that, where you're doing a distinct bout of physical activity with the intention of improving your fitness. This is, as you might have guessed, good for your well-being. And we have this area called NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So NEAT is an acronym. And you can see here, thermogenesis is heat generated, calories burned, energy expenditure via non-exercise activity. So this is all of the other intentional movement that you do outside of structured physical activity. So this would be things like, if you're ever on campus at Mesa, walking up the giant flight of stairs we have in the back, or walking from your car in the parking lot to the store or restaurant that you're going to. This would be something like vacuuming, washing dishes, gardening, playing with kids, right? It's all of the non-structured movement that we do in a day. And as it turns out, this is actually a big deal for health. So, of course, everyone knows, yes, we should be exercising, and we'll look at exactly how much we should do here in a minute. But it's not just enough to exercise if you are sedentary the rest of the day. So if you do your one 30-minute bout of physical activity or your one 45-minute bout of physical activity in a day, and then the rest of the day you sit or lie down on the couch or in your office chair or at a table, you're still going to have some negative health outcomes from that. So NEAT, this sort of non-exercise movement, is important to sprinkle in throughout your day as well. Health-related fitness factors. So these components collectively make up your overall fitness, your physical fitness. So you may excel more in one area than another, and you may be looking to improve certain areas here. So let's look at this. All are important to varying extents for your overall fitness and well-being. So cardiorespiratory endurance, the ability of your cardiovascular and respiratory systems to provide oxygen to your working tissues. So this would be your heart and blood vessels, your lungs, the ability to take oxygen from your environment, send it out through your bloodstream, and supply it to your working muscles for movement. So you might think of something like jogging, running, swimming as looking to improve your cardiorespiratory endurance. Muscular strength and muscular endurance, similar but different. Muscular strength is the max amount of force your muscles can exert in a single bout or a single effort. So the maximum amount of force you can exert. Whereas muscular endurance is the ability of your muscles to exert force or contract over time, to endure contraction. So an example of muscular strength would be something like a 1 repetition max squat. You're lifting the heaviest load you can one single time, whereas muscular endurance might be something like holding a plank or doing your maximum amount of push-ups. The load or overall intensity is not going to be so high, but the duration or endurance is going to be longer. Flexibility, sometimes referred to as mobility, is the ability to move your joints through a full range of motion. And there's slight distinct differences in flexibility and mobility. Oftentimes, folks think of flexibility as just finding an end range of motion for a muscle and holding it there as a static stretch. That's great. But what we really want to be doing is focusing on mobility and making sure our joints and our tissues can move freely through a full range of motion. So that's an important component of fitness as well. And then lastly, body composition. This is the relative amount of fat and lean tissue you have. So let's first define those things. Fat tissue or adipose tissue is made up of your fat cells. You have a certain number of fat cells that can literally fill up or shrink in size. And if you need to store more fat, your body can develop new fat cells. This is part of the reason why it's harder to lose weight the more that you've gained, because you develop new adipose cells and adipose tissue if you go beyond the number of cells you already have, and your body fights to keep itself alive. That's its number one job. You'll hear me say that a lot in class. And if you've developed new cells and new tissues, your body wants to keep that alive too. So that can make it a little bit harder. Lean tissue is everything else in your body: muscle, bones, tendons, water, organ tissue, etc. So fat tissue, lean tissue is everything else. The relative amount of each of those things contributes to your health at all. It's not a one-to-one correlate. So lots of times people will think, well, if someone's overweight, then by default, they can't be healthy. Or if someone is a normal weight, then by default, they are healthy. And it doesn't quite work that way. Often these other factors, cardiorespiratory endurance, strength, muscular endurance, flexibility, will have just as big, if not bigger, of an impact on overall health and well-being, whether or not they shift someone's relative body size or body composition in the way they might want it to. So an overall picture of various factors that go into your physical fitness. And lastly, let's look at some training variables here. So as we get into our cardiorespiratory and resistance training lectures, we're going to look at some of the basic fundamentals, how to understand how these systems work, and we'll also look at how to design an exercise program. And these are some of the things you will think about. We'll go into more detail in each of them in those 2 lectures. The FIT acronym, FIT principle: frequency, intensity, time, and type. So what do each of these things mean, and what do you need to consider when you're looking at building your workout? First, frequency. How often are you going to exercise? And you get to decide what works for you here. Frequency: how many times per week are you going to exercise? 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days? You get to pick. Generally speaking, you want to get some kind of movement in most days of the week. And we'll look at what the US physical activity guidelines are here in just a minute. But more days a week, the better. However, it doesn't mean you need to go do a hard, high intensity workout at the gym every day. If you can go out and get a walk, or go out and get a run, or ride your bike with your kids, or walk on the beach with your friend, that is good. You want to get some movement in as many days of the week as possible. Intensity: how hard are you going? And this is typically dictated by speed, grade, or load. So when it comes to cardiorespiratory exercise, running, walking, swimming, biking, you'll be looking at speed and grade. How fast are you going, and what's the incline? Those are the 2 ways to increase the intensity. And then load: when it comes to weightlifting, how heavy is the load that you're lifting? Generally speaking, volume, overall volume, how long, the time, and the frequency of exercise will be inversely related with intensity. So if you're only going to be able to do a short amount of exercise a few times a week, you'll fare better with greater intensity. Whereas if you're exercising more times per week for a longer amount of time, you might have to temper back on the intensity for at least some of the workouts. Time, often referred to as duration as well, is how long is a specific exercise session? 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. Or when we're looking at resistance training, we'll also look at repetitions and sets for any given exercise. And then lastly, type or modality. What type of exercise are you doing or going to do? Again, are you going to walk, run, lift weights, take a Zumba class, take a cycling class, go skateboarding? So you're looking at, when you're making a program, how often, what intensity, how long, what type. And typically you look at a 1 week time period, and then you'll kind of map that out over a month or longer periods of time. Now, setting a plan for exercise can be very useful, even if it's flexible. And you'll do this as part of your next assignment. So even if you set Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm going to do X from 5 to 5:30, and then Tuesday, Thursday, I'm going to do this from 6 to 7. You want to have a loose idea. And if life comes up, that's okay. You pivot and you go to your second plan. You're flexible and pull in alternative options. Maybe you plan to go to the gym after work every day, and then one day you have to go pick your kid up early from school. Or for me, sometimes I try to exercise while my child is napping. Maybe she doesn't nap. So what's the next best option? Do I want to exercise with her? Not really, but sometimes it's what I have to do. So I pull her in. Maybe we won't do that. We go for a fast stroller walk, or, you find other ways to make something happen, even if it's not optimal, right? Maybe you're sick, maybe you're not feeling well, and you have to skip that day and do the next day, or you have to decrease the intensity. The most important thing when it comes to training is consistency. What we don't want to do is start off too hard, too intense, too fast, too frequent, and then fall off. So the most important thing is starting with something you feel confident you can do and building from there. Lastly here, how much exercise do you need? What is optimal for your health and well-being? Well, the US Physical Activity Guidelines were updated in 2018 to look at the duration and intensity of exercise for children, young adults, young people, and adults. And here's what they came up with. Children of toddler years, they recommend 3 hours a day of active play. And really what it says is they recommend just regular intervals of play throughout the day, that kids are up and moving their body, playing and expending energy in a variety of ways in a play-like structure, not structured exercise, but they're getting outside, they're on the playground, they're doing sports. So regular activity interspersed throughout the day, minimal screen time. Young people, 6 to 17 years, so the K through 12 years, 1 hour per day of moderate to vigorous physical activity that incorporates muscle strengthening activities on 3 days of the week. So lifting heavy objects. So this, again, can look more like play, can look like sports, or can look like structured exercise. And it's a mix of that moderate and vigorous activity, an hour a day throughout the week. So again, this could come in PE, this could come in sports, or exercise that individuals do on their own. And what is done in youth and adolescence sets the stage for the rest of the lifespan. And now looking at adults 18 to 65 plus, they recommend 2.5 to 5 hours of moderate activity per week, or 1.25 to 2.5 hours of vigorous activity per week. So let's break this down in a way that's a little easier to understand. First, how do we define moderate and vigorous activity? We'll look into this a little bit more in detail in the next lecture, but for simplicity's sake, you can use the talk test. If you can talk, but not sing a song, you're likely in moderate intensity physical activity. So you could still talk, you might have to pause to take a break here and there, but you couldn't necessarily sing a song or recite a lecture as I'm doing right now. Then you're likely in moderate physical activity. So something like a brisk walk. If you can't talk very easily, you can't say more than a few words without stopping to take a breath, you're probably in vigorous intensity physical activity. And if you can't talk at all, you're in very vigorous activity. You can only hold that for a very short amount of time. So either 2.5 to 5 hours of moderate, or 1.25 to 2.5 of vigorous, or some combination therein. So what does that shake out to in terms of minutes per days of the week? Well, 2.5 to 5 hours is 150 to 300 minutes of moderate activity per week, or 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous activity. So what this looks like is moderate activity of 30 to 60 minutes a day, 5 days a week, or vigorous activity of 15 to 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, not both, one or the other. So maybe you do 2 days a week of vigorous intensity activity, like interval stair climbing or running, or sprint intervals, or playing a vigorous intensity sport, basketball, for 20, 30 minutes at a time. And then maybe 3 days of the week, you go out for a brisk walk or a skateboard, or you take a Zumba class, right? So you're doing a mix of activities that you like, but we're looking for that key 30 to 60 minutes a day of moderate intensity physical activity, or half that, 15 to 30 of vigorous most days of the week, 5 days out of the week. So you're looking to move your body that much. And muscle strengthening activity 2 days per week. This would look like resistance training or calisthenics, and some sort of balance challenge every day. And this will look different depending on your age and ability level. Is it maybe just walking on unsteady ground, or maybe it's hiking, or maybe it's standing on a single leg, or maybe it's standing on a leg and closing your eyes, but something to keep balance up for the lifespan. And now they have these recommendations for older adults, for adults 18 to 65, for adults with varying physical disabilities, again, depending on what sort of activities you can do, and even for pregnant women. The moderate activity guidelines are still there for pregnant women. So the guidelines differ and can be adapted based on someone's ability and physical fitness level, but we're still looking for that baseline of 2.5 to 5 hours a week, or 30 to 60 minutes a day of moderate intensity physical activity. And this will look different depending on your ability level, right? So if you are a young, able-bodied individual, you might be able to go out and get whatever kind of activity you want to do. If you have limited time and limited equipment, you might have to do some sort of at-home HIIT training for 20 minutes in the morning 4 or 5 days a week. If you have some sort of disability and you're not able to walk, you might have to look into something like a crank cycle, or something that you can do with your arms and upper body, right? Hopefully there are varying ways that you can fit some sort of physical activity in. My dad, for example, was a physical education teacher for all of his working life, and then developed brain cancer in later adulthood. And he is no longer ambulatory on his own. He can't walk on his own. He's wheelchair bound. So he stuck his bike on a trainer and does stationary biking every day. And then he got a rower and uses that every day. So as much as possible, finding ways to move your body. And you'll see later in this lecture why this is so paramount, so important for your physical, mental, and emotional well-being. Now, what percent of the population do you think meet these guidelines? Surprisingly, or maybe unsurprisingly, not very much. For adults, all of the guidelines combined, the muscle strengthening and cardiorespiratory, it's about 20% of the population in the United States. And when we're just looking at the cardiorespiratory guidelines, it's about 50% of the population. So if you're not yet there, don't feel like you're alone, but start where you're at and build slowly. Start with something you know you can do now, and then add on gradually from there. And we'll look at how to do that in the next lecture.